911, what is your emergency?
Please send someone now. 2 dogs, they are on her. She is screaming. I think she is hurt. It is bad. It is really bad.
Life can shift in an instant, and when it does, there's no warning, no time to prepare. One moment, a person walks down a hallway they've crossed 1,000 times. Next, they're fighting for their life, caught in a brutal storm of teeth and muscle. Victims become headlines, their stories whispered behind closed doors. That kind of danger doesn't come dressed like a nightmare. It comes wrapped in reality, moving on 4 legs, carrying the raw power to tear everything apart. That reality was waiting inside a New York apartment building, where safety was supposed to be ordinary. Not shadows in alleys, not strangers in the night. The threat lived right next door, and it carried claws and jaws that could crush bone. They weren't trained for obedience. They weren't meant for companionship. They were bred as weapons. And the tragedy began with a woman named Maya Whipple. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't careless. She had the strength of an athlete, the confidence of a champion. Maya was a star on the lacrosse field, a player who dominated through sheer speed and sharp strategy. Her teammates saw her as both captain and anchor. She carried that fire into college, into the U.S. national team, into the locker rooms where banners marked victory and sweat marked dedication. Every step of her life spoke discipline, training, and control. By her 30s, Maya had shifted gears from competitor to mentor. Coaching at St. Mary's College, she brought out grit in her players, demanding precision, building strength. Off the field, she built a quiet home with her partner, Sharon Smith. Their apartment in Pacific Heights was polished, modern, serene. Everything about it suggested calm. They had no way of knowing that just down the hall, chaos waited, coiled and restless. The chaos came with names: Bane and Hera, Presa Canarios, massive barrel-chested dogs bred on the Canary Islands to lock horns with cattle and stand their ground against intruders. These weren't pets. They were slabs of muscle, each weighing well over 100 pounds, jaws built to snap like steel traps. Every inch of their bodies looked like a challenge. Bane, the larger male, moved like a predator disguised as a household animal. Hera, his littermate, carried the same menace. The dogs were housed by attorneys Marjorie Keller and Robert Knoll. But ownership didn't end there. They were being kept for someone else, an inmate, a man tied to the Aryan Brotherhood. That connection dripped menace into every corner of the building. Residents spoke in low voices. Doors stayed locked. The sound of claws dragging across the hallway floor sent tenants stiffening against their walls. Neighbors remembered the dogs pulling against leashes so thin they could have snapped like thread. The air in the apartment complex carried tension, snarls echoing through thin plaster, barking hammering at doors. A woman once pressed against the elevator wall, her breath frozen as Hera pinned her with a stare, gums peeled back in a soundless snarl. Keller tugged at the leash, her voice shaking, while the dog lunged again. Nothing about those moments felt like near misses. They felt like warnings, and every resident knew it. Warnings that would end in blood. The attack didn't erupt without signs. The fuse had been burning for months, lit the moment Bane and Hera were brought into the building. Every slam of their paws against the floorboards was pressure building. Every guttural growl was a promise waiting to be kept. By January of 2001, the pressure had reached its breaking point. When Maya opened that hallway door, she walked straight into it. The dogs surged first with sound, a bark like a gunshot, a growl low and rolling. Then came the charge. 100 pounds of force slammed forward, muscles striking like a battering ram. Teeth flashed, jaws locked, skin tore. The hallway that usually smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and dust filled with iron. The hot sting of blood carried into the air. Maya fought, twisting, bracing, her arms shoving against fur, her body slamming against the plaster wall. Bane dragged her down, Hera snapping from the side, claws raking across fabric and flesh. Neighbors froze at the sound before the panic broke. Doors slammed open, shouts rang. Someone yelled,
Please, someone
"Call
call 911."
911! Another voice screamed through the hallway, echoing against the tile. Keller tugged at the leashes, both arms straining, her heels skidding across the floor. But the dogs weren't leashed to obedience. They were locked to destruction. The attack was raw, relentless. Maya tried to rise, to drive her elbows into their skulls, to push toward the apartment door, but the weight crushed her down again. Every second stretched into violence. The snap of teeth, the scrape of claws, the thud of her body hitting hard against the hallway floor. And then the hallway became a battleground of chaos. Neighbors screaming, phones dialing, the echo of boots as emergency responders were summoned. The sanctuary had shattered. The danger wasn't outside. It was right there, built into the walls, bred into muscle and teeth. The warnings had been there all along. Neighbors had seen teeth bared and lips curled. They had heard that low guttural growl rattling through the hallway. One woman remembered how one of the dogs had lunged straight at a boy, its jaws snapping so close the air split with the sound of teeth clacking shut. The parents yanked their child back, their hands clutching his shirt, their breaths hammering in terror. The building manager had written notices, issued warnings, demanded control, but nothing changed. Robert Knoll and Marjorie Keller treated the complaints as a nuisance. Every time someone begged them to rein the dogs in, they shrugged it off, telling people, "They're just playing. You don't understand the breed." Their eyes carried something close to pride, as though fear itself was a badge of honor. Residents avoided the 6th floor entirely. Delivery drivers abandoned packages and bolted for the stairs. Even the mailman refused to risk stepping past the apartment. The air in the building was heavy with dread, every footstep on that hallway like walking past a loaded weapon. January 26, 2001, a Friday afternoon. The sky over New York was painted dull gray, the air damp with the ocean's weight. Maya Whipple carried groceries up from the street. Just a couple bags, 2 bottles of wine, ordinary things. She stepped from the elevator onto the 6th floor, her arms full. The hallway was quiet, the kind of silence that made the next sound shatter like glass. At the far end, Marjorie Keller wrestled with Bane and Hera. Witnesses would later argue whether the leashes had already slipped or if she simply lost control. It didn't matter. Both outcomes ended the same. The instant the dogs saw Maya, their bodies coiled and released like springs. The change was instant. Bane's muscles bunched, his frame a streak of brown blur, claws scratching hard against tile as he launched forward. Hera surged after him, her head low, shoulders pumping with each bound. The groceries hit the floor first, bottles clattering, fruit rolling, a bag tearing open. Maya's scream ripped the silence next, high and sharp, echoing down the corridor. Bane's jaws slammed toward her throat, teeth punching through fabric, skin tearing under pressure. She tried to push him away, her arms shoving against the massive fur and bone. But his weight crushed her backward. Her head struck the wall with a hollow thud. Hera closed from the side. Her teeth tore into Maya's arm, shaking violently, pulling her body across the floor. Blood smeared across the pale walls, a dark streak marking every drag. Maya kicked hard, her shoes slamming into ribs, but the dogs absorbed the blows, unrelenting. The hallway became a chamber of impact. The snap of teeth, the scrape of claws, the groan of floorboards under the rolling struggle. Neighbors burst from their apartments, shouts filling the air. "Call 911!" someone screamed. Another voice echoed down the stairwell. "They're killing her!" Keller pulled at the leashes, both arms shaking, her heels sliding uselessly against the slick floor. The dogs didn't loosen. They twisted, jerked, dragged their victim back and forth as if she were nothing but prey caught between them. Maya fought. She slammed elbows into Bane's skull, her hands clawing at his face, trying to wedge fingers into his mouth to break his grip. Blood sprayed as his teeth clamped harder. Her body scraped against the carpet, the tearing sound of fabric mixing with the crack of her shoulder hitting the wall. She reached for a door frame, nails scratching at wood, but Hera yanked her back down. Through a peephole, one neighbor watched it unfold, eyes wide, breath frozen. He saw the blur of bodies thrashing, the spray of red painting the walls. His shaking voice carried over the phone line. "A woman is being killed by dogs!" His words trembled, but the urgency cut like a blade. Dispatchers locked onto his tone. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't panic over barking. This was life being torn apart. The fight dragged on, second after second, stretching into torture. 10 minutes. 10 long minutes. Maya's voice grew hoarse, then cracked, then faded to broken gasps under the weight of muscle and jaws. The dogs never relented. Each time she tried to rise, they slammed her down again. Each time she tried to shield her face, they drove teeth deeper into flesh. The hallway was filled with sound, snarls, the thud of bodies hitting plaster, the faint ringing of her dropped groceries rolling out of sight. When officers finally forced their way inside, key turning after desperate fumbling, the building itself seemed to hold its breath. They raced up the stairs, boots pounding, the muffled sounds of violence growing louder with every step. The 6th floor greeted them with carnage. The walls were streaked red, the floor slick. Maya lay broken, her body twisted, her face unrecognizable beneath torn flesh and spilled blood. Around her, her groceries lay scattered, wine bottles shattered, food crushed under the weight of violence. It wasn't a hallway anymore. It was a battlefield. Maya Whipple's body lay on the cold floor of the 6th floor hallway. What had once been a vibrant athlete, a coach, and a partner was now reduced to a shattered form. Her clothing was shredded, pulled apart in strips that clung uselessly to her skin. Blood soaked the fibers, spreading dark stains across the tile. Her flesh was torn open in dozens of places, wounds so deep they revealed bone. Bane, his mouth slick with crimson, stood only feet away, his massive head lowered, nostrils flaring, tail wagging in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The motion wasn't playful, it was chilling. To the officers on scene, it looked almost like pride. The danger hadn't ended when Maya stopped moving. The first priority was neutralizing the animals. Officers shouted commands, their weapons drawn, the hallway filled with the sound of boots and the smell of gun oil. Bane stood his ground, chest heaving, saliva dripping pink with blood. Hera barked from inside the apartment, claws raking at the door. Officers forced the dogs into separate containment, dragging their massive frames out with catch poles and chains. Only once the snarling was muffled behind steel doors could paramedics push forward. Marjorie Keller and Robert Knoll were pulled aside, separated for questioning. Keller's hands trembled, her clothes spattered with blood. But when asked what happened, her first words were not about Maya. She said she had tried to shield her dogs, terrified they'd be taken from her. That admission would echo in headlines for weeks, a woman protecting animals over a dying neighbor. Paramedics worked frantically, the narrow hallway too confined to maneuver. They lifted Maya carefully onto a stretcher and carried her into the lobby, where there was space to spread equipment. Gloves snapped, gauze rolled, saline bags ripped open, tourniquets tightened. They pressed their hands hard against her wounds, but the blood kept pouring. 77 distinct injuries marked her body, each a separate entry in a catalog of torture. Her pulse weakened, then slipped away, each second turning the fight into a losing battle. She was rushed to New York General Hospital, sirens wailing across the city. Doctors and nurses were waiting, but the damage was catastrophic. Too much tissue destroyed, too much blood lost. At 6:45 that evening, just hours after she'd stepped into the elevator carrying groceries, Maya Whipple was pronounced dead. The shock spread instantly. News wires blazed. A popular lacrosse coach mauled to death by her neighbor's dogs. To the public, the story was horrifying enough in its outline, but the investigation soon revealed details darker than anyone imagined. Residents lined up to give their accounts. Stories of being trapped in elevators as the dogs lunged, packages dropped in terror, footsteps quickened past the 6th floor. Each testimony added weight to the case. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a disaster foretold. Police examined the owners. In every interview, Keller and Knoll showed no grief, no apology. Instead, they deflected blame. They suggested Maya had provoked the animals, even floated the absurd idea that steroid use or athletic gear triggered them. Their statements dripped arrogance. Reporters caught their quotes and ran them under bold headlines. Public opinion flipped overnight. No one saw a tragic mistake anymore. They saw negligence, cruelty, and contempt. The autopsy confirmed the worst. Maya had died of exsanguination, bled to death by the sheer number of injuries. The pathologist counted the wounds one by one, recording the horror into official record. It was a slow, agonizing end that left even seasoned medical staff shaken. The media latched onto every angle. There was the innocent victim, an accomplished athlete, a coach, a partner. There were the vicious animals, Bane and Hera, their snarls remembered by every resident. There were the owners, lawyers with bizarre ties to a prison gang. The Aryan Brotherhood connection added a shadowy layer, feeding speculation and outrage. The story became a national obsession, part cautionary tale, part courtroom drama. New York District Attorney Terrence Hallinan made a bold move. He announced not only manslaughter charges, but second-degree murder against Marjorie Keller. His reasoning was revolutionary. She and Noel had been warned again and again. They knew the dogs were dangerous. They had allowed them to roam, to intimidate, to escalate. They had lit the fuse, and when it exploded, they were criminally responsible. The prosecution didn't have to prove intent to kill, only a conscious disregard for human life. More than 30 witnesses took the stand. Neighbors, mailmen, visitors, dog walkers. Each carried another piece of the same puzzle: aggression, neglect, fear. The courtroom filled with stories of near misses and close calls. One woman testified about being pinned to the elevator wall. Another described sprinting up the stairs rather than risk walking past the apartment. The weight of testimony was overwhelming. The verdict stunned the nation. Marjorie Keller was found guilty of second-degree murder, the first such conviction in a dog mauling case. Robert Noel was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The ruling sent shockwaves. Owning a dangerous animal was not just a personal risk. It was a responsibility that, if ignored, could carry the gravest legal consequences. But the impact didn't stop there. Sharon Smith, Maya's partner, tried to file a wrongful death suit. California law didn't recognize same-sex partners at the time. The injustice was glaring. The public rallied behind her, and lawmakers responded. The tragedy became a catalyst for change, pushing forward legislation that gave same-sex partners equal rights to sue. Maya's death carried a legacy not only of loss, but of progress. Bane and Hera were taken by animal control. Evaluators determined they were too dangerous to rehome. Both were euthanized. For residents of the Pacific Heights building, the relief was mixed with trauma. The hallway was scrubbed, but memories lingered. People whispered about the screams, the stains, the way the walls once shook with snarls. The 6th floor became part of New York's dark folklore, a place where a promising life had ended in violence. In the end, the story wasn't simply about dogs. Dogs are animals, capable of loyalty and love, but also strength and ferocity. This was about the people who owned them, two individuals who treated power as a toy and fear as currency. They ignored warnings. They dismissed neighbors. They believed themselves untouchable. Their arrogance and negligence combined into a weapon, and Maya Whipple paid the price. Her life had been built on discipline, passion, and love. It ended in a hallway that should have been safe. The tragedy remains a brutal reminder. Sometimes the monster isn't hiding in the wild. Sometimes it's waiting behind a neighbor's door, held by a leash, shaped by human hands and unleashed by human arrogance. And when that monster strikes, it doesn't just kill, it leaves behind scars on a community, on laws, and on history itself.